Dave, good to see you, buddy.
What's
How's it going?
happening? I'm good. I'm good. How's your week been, man?
It's been good. I got back from Las Vegas, Nevada, early this morning, red eye back, but I'm just fired up to be back to work. Had a great conference with Keller Williams, learned a lot, and yeah, excited to be on this
Nice.
episode of Short Term Rental Success with my guy Dave Menapace.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, things have been good on our end too. Continuing to bring on co-host clients, launched a few consulting clients. It's always really, really fun when we launch
That's awesome.
a new consulting owner and they get really like I get excitement. I've seen them get excitement out of their first bookings. And with how we set it up, that happens fast. Usually it's like 2 days later, it's like, I have 4 bookings. And then we're kind of working through how to pull that all apart and how to get them, bring the excitement down a little bit and stay level headed. But it's a lot of fun. It's something I really enjoy about the consulting business.
I don't have kids, but I imagine it's like seeing your kid learn how to ride a bike. Like it's just like, wow,
Totally. Oh,
fires
yeah.
you up.
Yeah. It's
That's
really
awesome.
fun. It's really fun. Well, let's introduce the guest. So, who do we got
Absolutely.
today?
We've got a really special guest. So, if everybody doesn't know already, Dave Menapace, 5-star co host in consulting, property management, all throughout New England. And we've got his better half, Chief Operating Officer, Kim Menapace.
Hi,
Miss
thanks for having
Kim.
me today.
It's good
Thank
to
you
see
for
you, Kim.
joining
Thanks for
us.
coming
Well,
on.
I know
Kim, do
it's
you
a
want
fun
to
last minute
introduce?
surprise.
Yes, yes. And would you like to introduce our topic for today? It's a good one.
Sure. So we're going to talk about neighbors today. Seems like an odd one, you might think, with short-term rentals, but it's actually a very relevant topic as an owner or a co-host because they play an integral part, and they can be really great advocates for you and keep eyes on your house for you. But they can also be very challenging if you have guests being disrespectful of the neighborhood and the property. It can really shut down your business very quickly. So this was something that came up a couple of weeks ago. We thought it'd be an interesting one to address and one that doesn't come up as often.
Yeah. And what I'll
Yes.
say, like on the neighbor side too, I always think it's the first step in regulation. When you start to see neighbors complaining to the town about these Airbnb crazy people and parties, that's usually what starts talks about regulation. So we're going to talk about the good, bad, and ugly, all the way from when I'm involved to really the management, which is the meat and potatoes of the conversation.
Well, I think that's such
Yes.
a good point, and I think that's why Airbnb takes it so seriously. If they get complaints all the way up to them, they have limited the number of people that can be at a house, even if a house can sleep 30 people. I think, keep me honest, you two, if that they limit it to 16 people, 16 guests now, and a big part of that was because of parties and that concern with regulation. And we'll go into this a bit more, but they can discontinue your all of your listings under your account for 30 days or more at their discretion if they do get complaints from neighbors. So it's a really serious thing. And you're right, this is the first domino to go down with leading to a bad outcome on regulation in your neighborhood if that's where it starts to go.
Yeah. So if it's okay with you to kick it off, I'll maybe spend like 2 minutes with the boring stuff talking about neighbors on the acquisition side and what I look for as a short-term rental specific agent and investor myself, and chime in and work with me. Really, when people come to me and they say, "Well, what are neighbor situations here or there?" I tell them, we'll really only make acquisitions in neighborhoods where we know exactly what's going on. So the first thing that I always look for is I like to invest in vacation markets because you don't have a large concentration of owner occupied homes. A lot of these cities, and I say cities, but even suburbs, there's other states out there, Midwest, really anywhere that have these kind of niche destination town feels, but you find a lot of the neighbors actually live there full time. That's why I like to invest in, yeah, ski resorts, lakes, beach markets, places where usually people aren't living there full time. And I know you guys like to manage in those markets as well. Oh, you're muted, Mr. Dave. You want to miss good stuff.
There we go. There we go. Yeah, I was going to say absolutely. And it's really interesting because each of the different vacation markets we're in really has a different flavor. Maybe three we can touch on between Kim and I will be Cape Cod Beach, market, another one will be a southern Massachusetts beachfront property, but it's a very residential area. And then we'll talk about Maine and some interesting nuances up there, as some of our houses, including the one we own, are in a bit of a hybrid situation. Um, as it relates to Cape Cod, we have this really fantastic situation where, we are the only house on our street that does short-term rental, but because of the type of guest avatar that we attract, it's a smaller home. It's usually small families. Some of those guests have really come to enjoy some of the neighbors they're all second homes. They're not year-round people, but they're down there on the weekends. And there's actually been some fun friendships that have formed between our guests and our neighbors, and everyone treats that home as if it's their own. That's not always the case in Cape Cod, but Kim, what's your input on that market specifically, and what should people look out for?
Yeah, I'd say in general, there's a high concentration of this being second homes. People living year round in Cape Cod is more rare, or it's people retiring in their 60s, 70s, 80s down to there. And so I think you're right, though. The guest avatar is small families in our house. And I just say families in general for vacationing there. Sometimes you have friend groups going down and getting a house together in their 20s, but then everyone starts siphoning off into families and having kids and getting their own places, just like we did back 5 years ago when we were having our first kid. I'd say something that's very cool about the neighborhood feel there is that our neighbors have history with our house too and other houses in the neighborhood. Oh, my grandfather bought this house and that house, or my great grandfather used to rent your house, meaning ours. So our neighbor across the street said his grandparents rented our house when it was a rental decades ago. So there's something very cool about that. We also have neighbors just watching out for us, saying, "Hey, your guests have been really good. They've been really respectful of your home. They haven't been too loud or noisy." Sometimes our next door neighbors will be the loud ones, and they're saying, "Oh, we're so sorry. Were they bothering your kids?" We're like, "No, they're totally fine. They slept through it with the white noise machine." So there's just that family atmosphere and that connection and community, and that's something that we love and one of the biggest assets of that house. So if God forbid we were ever to sell it, that's something I'd say is there's this incredible community. We all get excited to see each other every year and catch up on life and what happened in the last 9 months.
I love that. And it's something that can be super positive or super negative. And as a realtor, you have to toe the line with fair housing and, profiling who's there. But a couple of really easy things to see is like, what do the neighbors' homes look like? So you don't want a really nice house next to a junkyard, bad neighbor
Mhm.
situation, or houses that are really close. I mean, my lake house is close to the neighbors. I met the neighbors before I purchased it, right? So it's kind of understanding you can't pick your neighbors, but it's good to have that relationship. And you know what? Even though they're good today, things could change. So I always like to have some sort of buffer where you're not on top of each other. And then really the other thing is like, how is the subdivision laid out?
Right.
And then who's living there, right? Year round. Is it investors? Is it just seasonal users? Being just an investor neighborhood is also not like a great thing. So there's no perfect blend, but I always kind of look for a little bit of space and really understanding what the demographic is in that market. It's really easy: beach, mountains, lakes. We could breeze over Vermont, New Hampshire. It's pretty much the same thing. But think about space, think about who the neighbors are, and then also read the covenants for what the process is for voting in new rules for rental restrictions or just restrictions in general. I always make sure if there's an association in Maine, it's very common that they're only road maintenance associations with prior deed restrictions. So, very
Right.
important to take into account. That's kind of the boring side about the real estate, sales
It's
aspect of
helpful
neighbors.
though.
But yeah,
It's helpful because a lot of people will jump the gun and want to sell their house because of, challenges they might have with their neighbors or different things they're worried about. But you just made some amazing points. Even if you haven't gotten to do some of that due diligence before purchasing, as Will was saying, a lot of these different vacation markets, there are subdivisions that have some homeowners association of some kind. Understand those rules before you raise the red flag, and understand what your rights are, because I back in the day used to worry about a lot of things that then once I reread our covenants realized they were complete non-issues. So
absolutely. And
yeah.
I think a lot of this can, just be figured out by talking to people. which we'll get into. But somebody in the real estate business, been in the real estate business for 35 years. We were talking the other day, just catching up, and he's like, what's so funny about nowadays in real estate and just in general is like people. I don't want to use the word keyboard warriors, but they're so quick to maybe go on Facebook or do this stuff, and it's like when I purchased my lake house, word got out that this realtor who flips houses and does short-term rentals was buying this place. And I just approached it by shaking people's hand and saying, "Hey, I'm the guy. Here's my phone number, and let's just talk about it. I'm not here to ruin your neighborhood, or maybe you see them at the home inspection or whatever, but just talk to people, and we can get in
Yeah.
front of a lot of these problems and just bring awareness to it.
Yeah.
And you can actually learn a lot from the neighbors too."
100. I like
100%.
that a lot. Having that empathy goes a long way, and I think putting a face to the name and humanizing it's so important. So going back to what you said, Will, on proximity of the houses is a big factor. I think that dovetails with how I was thinking of approaching thinking through all the things that could be problematic with neighbors, which we've either experienced or you just need to think about and watch out for that we haven't personally experienced yet. But it's your five senses. So they're going to complain about things that bother them, like their sight. We have heard of complaints of a light being left on and a neighbor's constantly texting an owner, "Hey, your guest left the light on that shines right into my window. Can you please ask them to turn it off?" So thinking of those types of things that could bother a neighbor, you'd be surprised how much we've heard that one before, either personally or other owner operators have heard that one. And then you have an obvious one of noise. So partying, a dog barking at a dog friendly apartment or a non dog friendly, sorry, not apartment, but house. We've had a non dog friendly house have a dog snuck in because it was so little and it was barking. So it was helpful for the neighbors to let us know because we couldn't see that on the cameras on the driveway. But we were able to help address that situation. And also, unfortunate for the neighbor to have a little yappy dog bothering them because this is a year long resident at that house. Things like if you have a hot tub and you have a music speaker attached to the hot tub, we actually disconnected our speaker that's attached to the hot tub and we ripped out the page that tells you how to hook up the Bluetooth to it because we found that it was just causing a lot of headache and issues. If people are going to be respectful and bring maybe a smaller speaker out or their phone, you can have just as great a time with the music at a lower decibel, which brings us to our minute noise detection system. So Dave can probably speak better to this, but we've actually used technology and leveraged that and help that create a buffer with neighbors and tell them, "Hey, we have a noise detection system." So it'll actually automatically call and text our guest as soon as the volume gets to a certain decibel that we had set. So we've got you covered. We agree. We don't want this to be a problem either. So we can go into more of the senses, but I'll pause and let you guys chime in on either of those, the sight or the sound problems for neighbors.
Totally. I
Right.
mean, I love like always approach these interactions with empathy. If you don't, you're just not going to get very far. And especially if you live far away, that neighbor has a high potential of making things really difficult for you and making things difficult, like ruining the guest experience. And at the same time, the neighbor might not be wrong. Right. So both of you could be right in some way, shape, or form. So I think, one golden rule we always live by at the Five-Star Co-host is always do right by owners, by neighbors, by guests. Put yourself in their shoes and then think of a creative solution to get you through the situation. So to Kim's point, we did run into this in a home that we own up in Maine. And rightfully so. Neighbors were being kept up until all hours of the night. And even though our home sits on 5 acres of land, the home is located on the very corner of that property line, but our guests didn't realize that. And since we're at the top of a hill, noise can really, really travel. Um, Knowing exactly what you can and can't do on your property is first very important because then it'll allow you to know if somebody threatens you to have Airbnbs banned, you can actually understand what their power of authority is in that. Not to get in an argument with them, it'll just tell you how much you actually have to worry or not worry about something. The next piece, like Kim said, was, we put a noise decibel reader in that really does help keep the sound down, but it also allows us to draw a red flag if we happen to get a complaint that may not have been registered. And the last thing is we have a camera on the property. But what I will say is we installed those. We never did tell the neighbors that we put those in. And we went from getting complaints almost weekly in the first few months to maybe once in the last year or year and a half. So these tools, these technology tools are doing their job, and the neighbors, I would have to imagine, are much more thankful for it. It's a much better relationship than it was at first. And don't be a secret host. I think, Will talks about this all the time. Get in front of it, go talk to the neighbors, always match them with empathy, and don't take necessarily what they say as gospel. Gather your own data, and you do that with some of these different tools, but also setting appropriate expectations with guests.
Yeah, and the neighbors too. Like I tell them,
Right.
if there's a problem, send me a text message. Like you teach people how to treat you. If you just give them the phone number and say, "Hey, nice to meet you. Call me if there's a problem," and they start blowing you up, people need to be taught how to treat you and bring things to your attention, right? So like maybe you tell your neighbor like, "Hey, if the lights are left on, I don't care. They're LED bulbs, like don't even worry about it." I told mine at the lake that, like, Jay, they're just going to be on all the time. If it bugs you, let me know, but they're far enough apart, no problem. Speaking of lights, I think another consideration is I hear oftentimes people have big floodlights that are shining in, or, you know, people are parking cars and leaving lights on, shining into houses. So it's just being cognizant of things other than sound and just being a good neighbor and just
Yeah.
thinking, what does this look like from a usability perspective, which we talked about last week, even for the guests. So not something we can monitor, but something we can think about and be cognizant about.
I think that's a good point that there's 3 actions that the neighbors are gonna probably take when they're trying to address a noise issue, a light issue, anything. They're gonna try to contact you, as the property manager or the owner. They're gonna contact the authorities, which we have had happen before, or they're gonna contact Airbnb or Verbo or whatever site they think that the guest booked through. And so I think being mindful of that and being available, and sometimes like they said, they are right, and they're I'd be frustrated if I were in their shoes as well. And sometimes actually, the guests aren't being that bad, and they just hate the fact that there's a short-term rental next to them, but there's nothing else we can do. The guests have been respectful of the rules from what we could tell. Sometimes you just got to take arrows for your owners, and that it's hard, but you just got to continue to have that smile and that professional front and that empathy with them, understanding that not everyone loves the fact that short-term rentals have really grown in the last 5 to 10 years.
What I'll
Yeah.
say too is like in my business and life, I go by an acronym. It's detect, isolate, correct, and move on. That's really all we can do. But if we can detect the problem, you know, isolate, figure out what it actually is, correct it, we're in good shape. It's when we dwell on it or do nothing or we don't have those fierce conversations. That's when I see people get into trouble and oftentimes get out of short term rental and blame it on bad neighbors when really it's probably a communication issue and they never really isolated and corrected what the heck was going on because a lot of people don't have the time to be making bogus complaints or playing, on Facebook, complaining about their neighbors. Like they just want to live their life or enjoy their great vacation home. So that's kind of what I run by.
Yeah, I
Totally.
like that. So going back to a couple more of the senses that you'll just want to be mindful of and try to protect against is smell. So our houses typically have a good buffer in yard around them. So, but we have had people smoke super close to our properties, in our properties. So that's where ozone machines and sprays and stuff can help you just for the turnover piece of it. But I could see neighbors having a real problem if you're in a condo complex or houses are much closer together if you have people smoking cigarettes or something else. So that's another thing that can really bother neighbors, rightfully so. So something to be aware of. And we have language in our listings: no smoking, no smoking within 20 feet of the house. We have a $500 fine if you do that. And so we try to have that the stick there to try to prevent that. But we haven't had personal complaints of that, but we do know people who do manage apartments and condos. And so that's something that people are just, you can't get any closer than that in proximity and need to be mindful of that. And then the last thing I'd say is kind of disturbing of the peace, and something that you want to think about. These are more edge case things that you wouldn't think of. But if you have a dog friendly property, is that dog, are people having them off leash and it's running up at neighbors? Are neighbors afraid for their safety? Could they get bit by that dog? We had an issue where we never thought that guests would bring dirt bikes and drive them all over our property and all over the dirt road. And we have a road association, not an HOA. And so they were complaining about that because it's tearing up the dirt road and you're not supposed to do that. And so something we didn't even think to ask guests, are you going to bring a dirt bike? Those aren't allowed. So we have to be proactive in our guest agreement. No dirt bikes allowed. No trailers are approved to be parked at this property unless there's prior approval. So there's just these things that you need to think about where there might be damage to people or to other people's property or common area properties. So just trying to prevent against that, so you don't have to learn from experience on those things.
An observation I have, which is interesting with your business, is I feel like there's less likelihood if you're a smaller operator or even you just have your name on the account for a guest to be reckless and abuse and not care, versus if they're renting with, I'm going to say it, a Vacasa or an Evolve of the world where it's like, oh, I don't give a crap who's here, the neighbors, it's some corporation versus like when you guys list properties on the management side, it's under, Dave and Kim's account and these are
Right.
family properties. And that's how I've always branded and marketed them is like, this ski condo, this is my family condo. And like, I always empathize with the guests, like, hey, it'd be really cool if you could smoke your cigarettes on my deck. I don't want you to because I think it's gross. And it's not me, man. It's the neighbors and the association. So I'd really appreciate it if you just walked away. I really don't want to get in
Mm.
trouble or fined. Thanks so much for
Right.
understanding. Versus, a corporation, limited liability company reaching out with this, fine message on Airbnb versus just being proactive. And I have a message that goes out on the condo that's just like, hey,
Yeah.
I really hope you're having a great time. Hope check-in was smooth. Just a couple rules to remind you of. I don't really want to be that guy, but at the end of the day, I have neighbors I want to respect and I take a lot of pride in my properties. So kind of taking the corporation out of it. And something we talked about, Dave, is like, you know, these large management companies maybe have like yard signs that say like Vacasa. It's like they're more
Right.
likely to beat the crap out of a property and not care about neighbors or care about their surroundings if it's a large, entity with no human element.
Right. Oh, it's such a good point, man. Such a good point. Yeah, in some ways, your neighbors can make or break your property. It's always a good idea to do that research ahead of time before buying. We know of several subdivisions in the Sunday River area that are pretty much exclusively short-term rentals. I mean, almost every house is a short-term rental. You're obviously not really going to have many issues with neighbors there, but there's a lot of areas in Maine where people are there year round, right? And Cape Cod, even though there's a million rentals, there's also a lot of people that don't rent their home out, and it's just good to be respectful of that. It's okay to take the side of the neighbor, almost start out on that side and work your way backwards from there, but keep a good relationship there. They can truthfully be your best friends or your worst enemy, depending on really your own attitude towards the situation.
Right,
I
I've
think
heard
that's
of
a great.
neighbors bringing packages in for clients of mine. I mean, great relationships, and then I've heard of, nightmare situations. No one I've worked with, but, like, a good example is Vermont is really mixed. You'll be even in Stowe, there's a lot of year-round residents, so, like, those are
Right.
some markets you have to be more careful with, but, like, I mean, really, we see good experiences with a lot of the houses I sell, and you manage with, like, rock star neighbors that are, "Yeah, hey, I threw some sand on your driveway for you, it looks slippery." It's like the majority are great people if you treat them with respect.
Yes.
Absolutely. And if you do have, like we were talking about at the very beginning, if there starts to be really negative situations and they just compound and compound, you do have regulation being the scary, boogeyman in the STR space. And so I think that you have to understand that um, being very hospitable and mindful and caring and very empathetic on each of these interactions is going to help. So there isn't this big surge and storm wave of regulation. And then I think on the near term, things that can happen today is we've heard of people in our communities that got their listing shut down. They fell asleep. There was a party at their property. They weren't available to try to address it, and even there's only so much you can do to address it from virtually from if you're at a fair distance away from your properties. And people did call Airbnb and his account got shut down. So he couldn't accept any new bookings for 30 days across his whole portfolio. And while they investigated this, because Airbnb would rather shut down your account than have something contribute to a regulation battle in your entire
That's right.
county. So that's why we've heard of these situations of like lost revenue for those dozen accounts, and they're able to follow through with existing bookings, but they can't accept any new bookings. They're taken out of the search results for 30 days or if not more, and they have to also start defending themselves on how they handle the situation. So that's something why it's very important to be mindful of the negative repercussions in the short term that can happen today if you have a party at your property and a neighbor calls Airbnb and really hems and haws about the neglect that happened in handling that situation.
Totally. Totally. Well, I think that's probably our mic drop. I think that's that's probably a good pointer to end on. Any parting thoughts? We
I
cover it
would
all.
throw it out to you guys. I'm curious. 30-second response. You've got an issue with a neighbor. How do you guys handle it as a manager managing, 25, 30 listings quickly?
Generally, it always comes as a complaint, so immediately I apologize, even if it
Okay.
has nothing to do, we have no fault in the situation. I immediately apologize and put myself in their shoes.
Mhm.
Then I work backwards to try and discover what happened. So I'll go into step 2. Once the complaint has been issued, I go to the guest and I ask for their side of what happened if I need to get it for some reason. Sometimes it's after the fact, but I never blame the guest either. I always ask for their story and then we try and come to a common solution if a solution is even needed in that time and place. Sometimes a neighbor just needs to be heard.
I
Love it.
think, Dave, you nailed it with the feel, felt, and found. Feel your pain.
I'm
I have
learning.
felt that before, and this is what I found in my investigation and what I'm going to do moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Well,
awesome.
perfect. Well, I love it, team. Another episode of STR success in the books. We'll start with Kim. Kim, if people want to network with you, find you, how can they?
I'm most active on Instagram, so Kim Menapace with no underscores or anything. You can get links to our website and other accounts from there, but that's probably the best place where I'm most active.
I love it. Mr. Will, top STR realtor in New England. How can folks find you?
Yeah, if they want to buy, sell, or invest, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, they can reach out to me on my website, willvanwickler.com, book a free discovery call, or reach out on social media. Happy to connect. And Dave, if they purchase a
Okay.
property, maybe they need some help or looking for a manager, you're the guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Dave_Menapace on Instagram, or you can just head to our website, 5strcohost.com. Shoot us an inquiry and we'll get in touch. On that
Awesome.
note,
Well, I'll see you next week, Dave, and hope to see you soon, Kim. Appreciate the help on this. Awesome.
Bye, everyone.